My maternal grandmother, Alice, was born 116 years today. November 27th, 1900. It was always so easy to keep track of how old she was when she was alive, because every time she had a birthday, whatever year it was, that's how old she was. Many of you have, I think, read her story in this book. She never met a stranger. And some of you I know have been reading it and passing it along to others. And this is an extra copy, and it's just on a trust basis. If you would like to read the book, it's here. I'm going to leave it right up front, and you're more than welcome to take it. I just ask that when you're done, you bring it back to church and pass it on to someone else or give it back to me. My grandmother was a very special person in my life. Many of you know that, and I've spoke about her before in some of my previous sermons, but since today is her birthday, it just seems so appropriate to share about her one more time. She was born in a little tiny log cabin in Rockvale, Montana, a little tiny community between Billings and Red Lodge, if you know Montana at all. She was the fourth of 6 children, and she was the first one to be born into a tiny little log cabin, which to the family seemed like luxury. It just seemed like, oh my gosh, it's a brand new home. I have a picture of that cabin at my home, and my mom actually had an original painting done of the cabin. And a really good friend of hers, actually a lady whose nickname was Tin Lizzie, who painted on tin, did this little flower sifter for her. And she painted the log cabin right on here. And I keep this in my kitchen, but this is the log cabin where my grandmother was actually born on November 27th, 1900. So I really treasure this. A lot of people probably look at this little thing up next to my refrigerator and think, why do you have that? But now you know. So the reason it was so special to my family was before that, the family lived about 200 miles away near Townsend, Montana. And when the Crow Agency opened up, or the United States basically allowed people to homestead where the Crow Indians used to live, my grandfather got an 80-acre parcel of farmland, and he went and built that log cabin. And as soon as it was done, so that was my great-grandfather. My great-grandmother and the 3 kids that were born at the time came, and about 9 months later, my grandmother was born. And so this was just something that was a spectacular new home. But I've seen pictures of it. You could fit the whole thing in my living room. In fact, it wasn't even that big. It was just a tiny little 2-bedroom thing. And my grandmother told me when she was growing up, I much preferred to be outside with Dad and the 2 brothers out doing the ranching and taking care of the animals than inside with my mom and my sisters. And I thought, well, in such a tiny little place, no wonder she preferred to be outside. Now, my grandmother was one of those people that loved cooking and canning vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. But every chance she got, she would be outside helping with the animals, helping on the farm, and doing things in the fields. And when she was a little girl, she said, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a farmer. And of course, people laughed at her, and they explained that little girls don't grow up to be farmers. That's what little boys do. Little girls grow up to be women who stay indoors and do all the cooking and the sewing and the cleaning of the house. And she thought, you know, I'm not sure that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. So she basically, when she was in 8th grade, took a test. She had to catch a horse and buggy and then a train, I think, to go a few hours away to take the state test to go to high school, because there wasn't a high school for miles around in Rockvale. There was only a little 1-room schoolhouse from kindergarten through 8th grade, and the teacher taught everybody. She decided she was going to go to high school because she wanted to go to college and get a degree in agriculture. So Alice went on this train, went to a place a couple hours away, took the test, passed it, and then realized, oh my gosh, I've got to move away from my family. As a 9th grader, she was something like 13 or 14 years old, and she moved to live with a family in Townsend, which was about 200 miles away, and she graduated from high school with honors, and she had applied to Montana State College, which is now Montana State University in Bozeman, and she was gonna be the first woman to get a degree in agriculture. And of course, everyone just said, we don't know why you're doing this. They mocked her and ridiculed her, and they said, women just don't do this. Nobody's ever done this before. And she said, well, then I'm gonna be the first one. So I remember looking at her yearbook, and there's all these men, and the secretary of the agricultural club was my grandmother. She was one of those people that just didn't take no for an answer, and she had hopes and dreams for her life. And she wasn't just gonna say, well, if that's what other people don't want from me, then I'm not gonna do it. She decided that's what she was going to do. So when she was about 21 years old, she was the first woman to graduate from Montana State Bozeman with a degree in agriculture, and she felt like her hopes and dreams that she was ridiculed for as a child finally came true. And then she got married and had 3 children, my mom and her 2 younger brothers, and she realized that she was married to a very abusive, unfair, alcoholic husband who really didn't care for her or the children at all. He went out and made money and spent pretty much all on his own, and she had to go out and find food for the kids. And so it was a struggle, but one day he decided when he was around that he was going to take her for a ride and just kind of get out to the country. And a couple of her relatives watched the kids. Unfortunately, as he was crossing the train tracks, a train going full speed ahead hit her side of the car. He went flying out into the bushes with barely a scratch, and she was trapped inside this burning car with a broken neck, unable to move at first. But she crawled out, she explained, just barely, and then people saw that she was still alive, and they were shocked. They ran over and pulled her out of the car and got her away from the burning car, laid her on the ground, and just knew that she wasn't going to make it. And in fact, the doctors told the family, there's no way she will live through this. With all those 3rd-degree burns all over her body and a broken neck, nobody lives through this. When she regained consciousness, she could hear the doctors talking about her, saying she's never going to make it. And as she listened to other people talk, she realized that her husband never took care of the kids after that. He just went off and gambled and drank with his friends and did whatever he felt like he wanted to do. And he never called a single one of her relatives. She was in the hospital dying, and he didn't call her mom, her sisters, her aunts. And it just so happened that one of her aunts was going through town and saw in the newspaper that she was in a car accident and went to the hospital and realized how bad it was. And that's the only way the family found out about it. Everyone was wondering what happened to Alice, and he never told anyone. So she sat in that hospital bed thinking, number one, I'm going to get better so I can get out of here. Number one, to divorce him. It is over, it's over, it's over. And I need to get my kids back together. They need to grow up in a family. That was her hope and her dream at that point. And of course, people thought another outlandish and impossible hope and dream. She's dying here. She got better, and she was able to show the doctors that she was going to live, and they said, well, she might live, but she will never walk again. She'll never be able to take care of her kids. And you know what? She walked out of that hospital about 6 months later, and she made sure that her kids were well taken care of. And then she went back to school and got another degree. And so in about 3 years, she already had her degree, her Bachelor of Science in agriculture, and then she had a degree in home economics. And she realized that as a little girl, she really did like canning and cooking and doing things in the kitchen, but she also liked being out in the field, and now she could do both, and she could teach people in both fields. And so she basically worked on Native American reservations for a number of years, all the way through the end of World War II. And then she had the opportunity to move to the island of Hawaii in North Kohala and work amongst the women and children of the sugarcane plantations up in that part of the island. And basically, she was the 4-H leader, so she got to work with animals with the children, and she was the home economist. She was hired by University of Hawaii Extension as the home agent. So she actually got to do with her life, against all odds, exactly what her dream was as a little girl, even through all the stuff that she went through. So you can imagine how very proud I always was of my grandmother. And this week, as I was reading Isaiah, the passage that Mo just read for us a little while ago, I was thinking what the people were going through thousands of years ago, hundreds of years before Christ, was very similar in the sense that things just must have seemed hopeless. And Isaiah actually was written by at least 3 people over many decades. And during that time, the Babylonians from the north had come down and basically just devastated the land of Judah and Israel. They burned the villages and the cities and the temples and the synagogues. They killed many of the men who were of fighting age, and they took many of them back to Babylon in exile, basically to work as their slaves. They had to just feel like their country was over. There's no point in even having any hope for the future of their country. They had to feel like, well, our religious faith, what are we going to do? We're hopeless. And then Isaiah, in the chapter that we read this morning, says, and a shoot will come forth from the stump, and a branch will come from the roots. And Isaiah, the writer at the time, was just envisioning this outlandish, impossible hope and dream for all the people who felt so very, very hopeless. As I was reading that passage and thinking about my grandmother's birthday today, I thought, I'm pretty sure we all go through those times in our lives where we feel like it's hopeless for ourselves, maybe our communities, our nation. We go through these periods of time where it just seems like, where is the hope? It seems like the hope is really outlandish and impossible, and yet, over and over throughout the scriptures and in our lives, we see people hoping against all odds and people holding on. And even though my grandmother must have felt like that stump that was now useless, it used to be this thriving tree with branches and leaves and fruit, it's just a stump. That comes right out of Isaiah that we read this morning. And even though it seemed like that stump's life was over, I'm sure my grandmother had those moments where she just felt like, it's over. And yet, a branch shot forth from that stump and became even bigger and more fruitful than it was before. And that's the message of Isaiah and the message of Jesus at Advent. Even when all seems so hopeless, we have to hold on to the thread of hope. Sometimes it's the thinnest thread, knowing that there's always hope and always reason to have hope and to dream, because even when it seems like it's just an old stump and it's useless and nothing's ever going to happen with it again, a shoot comes forth from the stump and a branch from the roots. I think most of us have experienced that in our lives when we've been at those places where it's just seemed so hopeless. Many of you know that this pulpit right here was given in memory of my grandmother. And as I look at this often, I think of her, and I feel so blessed that when my mother passed away, she left me some money, and I just felt like it was really appropriate to do something in memory of her mother, who lived here on Kauai and spent, after she left the Big Island, her entire career, except for a year where she worked in India, in northern India. She spent her whole career working with women and children in the area of agriculture and home economics, trying to help people live better lives, have better nutrition for their families, know how to take care of the animals, and know how to take care of the environment. My hope is that when the scriptures are read from this pulpit and when words are given, that they will always be words of hope. Because on today, when we celebrate the hope that Jesus brought to the world and continues to bring to us in the many ways that he comes, this is what Advent is all about. This is what Christmas is all about, that we're looking so forward to now. And my hope is that when we come here to this church, we will always, always sense that hope that God brings to us simply by being present with us and reminding us to always hope and dream. Amen.